Hi, and welcome to the capital raising from US and Europe for Asian MedTech startups. This webinar is hosted by APAC Med and presented by Alira Health. My name is David Uffer. I'm the Vice President of MedTech for Alira Health. I'd like to welcome all of our attendees here. I'm going to give a short presentation to start us off on capital raising from the US and what we've seen in the environment around investors from venture capital into MedTech. After that, we're going to go into a roundtable with some esteemed venture investors, both from institutional and corporate investors. To start off, I'm going to give you a little bit of information on what we've seen in the environment in investing throughout MedTech. Throughout this next hour, I'll go through about 15 minutes of presentation and then open the audience to any questions that you would like to pose. If you see in the webinar here, we have a questions tab in the bottom right. Please feel free to enter any questions you want in text, and I'll be sure to pose these to our panelists. After the seminar is completed, we will also have a recording that each of you will receive through the web address that you logged into. You'll receive a recording of this entire session. So without any further ado, I'm just going to introduce Alira Health, which is the firm I've been with for 5 years. We are an advisory firm with global footprint throughout Europe, US, and Asia Pac. We advise companies in the areas of biotech and pharma, as well as medtech, in areas such as regulatory affairs, clinical affairs, strategy consulting, market access, and investment banking. With that, I'm going to let Candy Gan from APAC Med give an introduction about APAC Med, please.
Thanks, David. I'm Candy. I am the Manager of Strategic Partnerships here at APAC Med. I'm located in Singapore, and APAC Med is the regional MedTech trade association for the region. So to date, we comprise of close to 300 member companies, and we represent manufacturers and suppliers of medical devices, IVDs, digital health providers, and other ecosystem stakeholders such as local trade associations. And what we do is that we bring a unifying voice to the industry here. Now, more than half of our members are currently startups. And besides Singapore, some of the other countries we see a lot of them in are Australia and India. So the inspiration for this webinar series with Alira Health came from wanting to provide up-and-coming APAC startups help to enter the US and the European markets. Now with this, I'll hand back to David.
Thank you, Candy. I'm going to give a little bit of a snapshot here again on what we've seen in investments throughout MedTech. This is really healthcare venture capital deployed. I'm going to give you a 3-year snapshot here from 2019 through to 2021. We see 3 different buckets that you see on the bar chart here, showing health tech investment in the medium blue on the bottom, diagnostic tools, and in the light blue, and in the dark blue at the top, we see devices. You can see some considerable growth, though it's smaller investment dollars into devices. It's been considerable growth with almost 50% from 2020 to 2021. Quite a bit of growth as well as diagnostic tools. And certainly, if you look at the massive growth that we've seen in the marketplace from investments going into health tech, which we'll go into in the next slide, give you a little bit more depth in what each of these deployments have been about. We're talking about health tech here. You can see from the left down to the right where some of these buckets, if you will, are being deployed. In the US, see a considerable amount going into alternative care. These are areas such as ambulatory surgery centers, at-home health. There's been quite a proliferation of new sites of service in the US. This has certainly been exacerbated by the COVID crisis that we've had, where we're driving patients out of the acute care hospitals. We do not have the capacity to treat them, nor the intent to treat them as much as we have in the past in these primary sites in acute care hospitals. So we see alternative care seeing significant investment. Within that, we do see differences in the ownership and an investment into the market. This is also in the form of providers. We see a lot of services being invested. So as you look at this middle column here for clinical trial enablement, all different types of clinical trials are being deployed, whether they're through electronic patient reported outcomes, decentralized clinical trials, and so forth. So when we look at the $30+ billion invested there in those left three columns, quite a bit in very different sectors that we have seen versus historically. Other areas such as new types of insurance, healthcare navigation, still a growing field, but we see over 50 investments just in those areas. If we look at where these investments are going by region, you'll see quite a theme here on the extremes, both on the coasts in the U.S., left or west coast, and on the east coast as well. The Bay Area certainly is where we see huge proliferation of startups being born and invested in pretty significantly across the market. Boston, New York, another ecosystem that we see quite a bit of startups being born. And this is where you look at a lot of the investor bases are based out of. This is where we see the innovation taking place. In the Midwest, Chicago has pretty good amount of deal flow in the health tech area, as well as we see Austin, places such as Houston and Dallas in the Southwest, as we call it in the US, quite a bit there. Many people think of Minnesota as quite a MedTech wealthy area, but those are more so operating companies than young startups. If we look at the next step, what we see in after investment, and I wanted to give everybody a little bit of a snapshot of what happens post-investment and through the M&A process. We see, again, 2021 was quite a year for M&A activity. If you look at 122 deals just in MedTech from VC-backed companies, completely obliterated all of the previous years, under 80 acquisitions that were in each of the previous years, and even pre-2018, looking at a very small number. So explosive growth here in this sector. We look at the total median, pretty stable. We had a high in 2018, but those were some very large deals that bumped those numbers out. But still, in the nearly $100 million deal, the time to exit has reduced as well. In the past few years, we were looking at companies that were taking a little bit longer time to exit. In 2021, it was a very active market for M&A, and we saw, because of competitive nature, companies were rushing out to make their investments and make their acquisitions. Because of this hyper focus on M&A, we saw the average turn was 5 years from company inception through to exit. We shift a little bit here for just a moment and look at the diagnostics and tools investment trends. Again, probably a 2-to-1 ratio of R&D tools that were being invested in versus the actual diagnostic tech tests and the analytic systems that were going on. That those totaled about the same amount as R&D tools. These are life science tools that are very well regarded by the investment community. Again, the same themes we see here, a little bit more East Coast focus, but certainly the number of deals totaled about the same from just the Bay Area. Do see some ecosystems in Seattle that are very active, but again, this is a Bay Area and then a Northeast going all the way down to just into the North Carolina area. This is where the companies are being born and where they're being invested in quite a bit. This is another snapshot, folks, of what we see for the years. If you look at what happened in 2021, again, very active year for venture investing. You see some larger deals certainly in 2020, but the amount of deal flow was quite significant in 2021. The same trend we see in much quicker time to deploy capital, and then the same with the median years to exit when we're looking at just over 5 years, where in previous years that was pushing upwards of 10 years into the exit for some of these companies and the opportunities that they were seeing through their exit process. If we were to look at devices, this is the smaller segment, but this is quite a rich area in many different categories. The largest in the past year that we saw in 2021 in imaging, as you would expect, non-invasive monitoring. This goes a little bit more into the areas of remote patient monitoring that we've seen, where we needed these technologies to be invested in because of the proliferation, again, of COVID, and the fact that patients could not be accessing our acute care facilities, nor could they engage with their clinicians as much as they were. We saw quite a bit more use case and adoption of non-invasive monitoring and remote patient monitoring in these areas. But if you look at cardiovascular and vascular, those are the core of investments that we've seen historically. Very stable categories that still remain very hot and well invested in. They just in the past year, we started to see a proliferation of new technologies, new capabilities that we were looking at. Neurology became very hot years ago. We saw spine and in the past few years, even some different areas such as robotics and minimally invasive surgery. Neurology just happened to have a very good year in the past year. And again, more non-invasive technologies, and especially in neurology, have become to be extremely well invested. Again, if we look at this by region, certainly the West Coast in the US has the preponderance of investment in these areas, and not only just the Bay Area, but we've seen a tremendous amount of operating companies from Los Angeles all the way down to San Diego, and that's giving birth to quite a bit of new technologies and startups there that are starting to see significant amount of deal flow as well. The reason why we're talking about where these reside is that many companies we see that are being innovated outside of the US and do look to enter the US at some time before they do go commercial, they look to establish operations here. And as our panelists in a few moments will discuss, we look to see how companies are being invested while they're overseas from their origination, how they're being invested by the US institutional and strategic investors. A lot of times they do require or do look for companies to show intent to commercialize in the US, and it's most appropriate when they look toward that next objective and milestone that they do have established operations here in the US. And I'm not speaking to R&D, but at least a commercial presence in an operating office that understands the US market, go-to-market strategies, how the market, from a market access and a technology acceptance looks in this geography. We look at some of the M&A activity again in the device area. Quite a bit of M&A that we've seen in 2021, almost $7 billion. You look at the number, it's again much greater than we've seen in any of the previous years. And the time to exit has come down significantly in 2021 from the mid-teens when we looked at 16, 17, 18, upwards of 8 years to exit. This is a much more competitive environment. I know a lot of the strategics felt like they were missing out on some good opportunities. It became very competitive to go earlier in M&A activities. So we've seen that trend continue. Digital health has been probably the largest area of investment as well. And again, this comes from the necessity as well as the maturity of this sector. If you just look at this number on the right, this was only data that we were able to pull from the first half because it was still being calculated for the second half of 2021. We're looking at $29 billion if we project it to be annualized over 2021 for investment just in digital health. And this is across anything from EMR systems to anything for remote patient monitoring, AR, VR, digital surgery, just a huge proliferation of technologies being born and well invested. Can't say that the M&A activity has changed significantly there. We look at the deal distribution here in this chart. This really shows where the capital is being deployed, whether it's in a Series A all the way as you go to the right of this slide into Series D. The distribution has still been the same, but we've seen a lot more capital being deployed. in the sector. The exit trends, when I gave a speech on this in 2019 in Asia Pacific, we saw very few exits in the earlier years from 16 through to 19. And if you look at this just in the blue bar on the left-hand side, you could see in 19 a low of 47 exits in digital health. However, the last few years we saw 75 in 2021, and just through again the first half of 2021, 80 companies that were acquired. So we've seen a larger uptick in the acquisitions, and we think this is a little bit of an arms race to get these technologies into the hands of the larger companies. But not only the traditional MedTech companies, but we've seen a lot of tech companies that are outside of healthcare starting to acquire this infrastructure to work their way into healthcare. So we see many non-traditional players coming into the market through digital health as well. Within that, I'm gonna try not to do all of the speaking here. We have much sharper and smarter people when it comes to this area than I. So I'm going to let each of our panelists give an introduction to themselves. And we're gonna go through a series of Q&A that I'll moderate the panel. And again, I invite each of our attendees here, please feel free to share any questions that you would like through the app here. Just go ahead and write in your question, and I'll be sure to pose that to our panelists. Within that, I'd like to start with Ashley, go through Daniel and Lou to introduce themselves, a little bit about the firm that they represent, some of their investment thesis. While we do have three panelists here, they syndicate with many other investors, and they're very active in the marketplace and have been with many different organizations. So I invite them to talk about the general tenor of investing into Asia Pacific, not just from their fund, but what they see across the entire marketplace. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ashley.
Great, thank you, Dave. Thanks for having me this morning and your continued support of the innovation ecosystem. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Woodorf. I oversee business development for J&J MedTech in the Asia Pacific region. I've been in this role since last August and in Singapore since August of 2020. Dave had alluded to, we've all worked for a variety of organizations. So prior to that, I did work for AdvaMed, which is the US-based trade association overseeing the small company division, which is AdvaMed Excel, and also investor relations. So I think to Dave's point, you know, I would say and open today's discussion with, you know, make sure to leverage your network as much as possible. If you meet one person, it's very likely that that they know and have great working relationships with other investors and other partners in the industry. And I think I can't stress enough, it's never too early to start building those relationships. I know kind of some of the discussions that we used to have with small companies is don't wait until you need money to go meet people because then it's too late. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Daniel.
Hi, thanks Dave for the opportunity to to be part of this panel discussion. My name is Daniel Teo. I'm a managing partner with Honeywell Lake Ventures. We're a Palo Alto-based venture capital fund that's a MedTech venture capital fund that focuses and invests in surgical innovations. By this, we mean technologies that help our surgeons see, treat, and heal better. So the C component would include things like surgical navigation, surgical visualization and robotics technologies. Treat will be different kinds of treatment modalities, mechanical, but also energy-based. So, you know, RF, ultrasound, microwave, aqua, cryo, the whole works. And then heal at its most basic level would be sort of wound closure, wound healing technologies. But we also have a growing interest in the area of tissue regeneration and tissue healing. So look forward to the discussions and look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Daniel. And Lou?
Great, thank you, David. Hi, everyone. This is Liu Zhang. I'm the founder and managing partner of Fusion Fund. So Fusion Fund is a Silicon Valley-based VC firm focused on earlier stage deep tech and healthcare investment. So I started a fund back in 2015. So far, we have over $300 million under management, already invested across the North America with over 60 portfolio companies. So myself was a former entrepreneur. So I was an immigrant from Inner Mongolia to United States and a former material scientist at Stanford, and I used to build and run my own medical device company focused on diagnostic of type 2 diabetes. That company was eventually acquired by Boston Scientific. After that, according to my founder friend, I went to the dark side, started to invest. Yeah, fast forward to 2015, launch Fusion Fund. So from day one, we really wanted to build something different here at Fusion that not only just providing capital, will provide value add-on post-investment services, and also really leverage our former entrepreneur experience to understand the life cycle of early stage startup, especially healthcare company have a quite unique life cycle at earlier stage, be able to support founder from the early late stage and support them to be successful. And another thing I want to highlight about us is, although for now we're only investing company focused on North American market, but we definitely is a big promoter about first the diversity background of the founder, and another thing is global perspective of the company who are like building a new innovation, especially for healthcare. We can see lots of the advanced technology we invested here, they have a huge opportunity to apply it across different country and different region. That's also the thing that been keep me passionate about. Always look at opportunity outside the United States as well. We don't have plan to allocate capital, but we definitely want to be aware of all this new opportunity came out from other regions, especially Asia Pacific region.
Well, thank you all. And again, I am excited to have you all participate. I really appreciate you joining in here today. Let's start a little bit big picture. I gave a little bit of a snapshot of what we saw in the last few years, but I've been in MedTech myself for 30 years. And I was around through the mid 2000s when we had the financial crisis in the US. And we looked at, Daniel and Lou, you're out in the Palo Alto area. We looked at Sand Hill Road, which is where a lot of the investors were located in MedTech investing. And we watched that dry up and got very worried. Is this a little bit of the downward spiral for MedTech? And it's come back extremely strong. And I think through the COVID crisis, we've all understood how important healthcare is and to invest in innovative technologies. And we've seen quite a resurgence, not just in the last few years, but certainly it came back after the financial crisis hit the US. Talk about your viewpoint of the near-term future for investing from US funds into global opportunities. You want to start with that, Lou?
Sure, happy to. First thing, I 100% agree with you. The past 2 years, because of COVID situation, the whole financial market realized first it's a huge opportunity for healthcare sector. US is spending 20% of GDP into healthcare right now, and we have such a system. So lots of funding trying to support new technology, not just the traditional healthcare innovation focused on cure disease, but also new technology, apply AI edge computing to solve, I call it AAA problem, accessibility, affordable, accuracy problem in the whole healthcare system. So when we look at that, another related new trend is really technology helping improve the quality of life for aging population. It's not only just a cure disease, but also how to diagnostic disease at the earlier stage, and also potentially work with insurance company to guarantee a much better quality of life. So when we talk about aging population, yes, there's a huge aging population here in the United States, in North America, and also there's a huge aging population in Southeast Asia, in Pan Asia as well. That's also when I heard lots of my fellow investor friends in Silicon Valley start to look at Southeast Asia as a potential market for their solution to also consider for future market penetration. And also, moreover, there's more discussion about look at local opportunity. Probably still, the reality is we may have the best technology innovation here, the fundamental tech innovation here in the US, but talk about a healthcare service solution, apply AI solution like network technology solution for healthcare system, there's opportunity for local founder and local entrepreneur who really understand the local community, be able to create something new. So I know a couple big VC firms, they start to launch a Southeast Asia specific focus fund since 2020. And also I heard even larger VC like Sequoia and Tiger, they have their team local already, and they're thinking about increase the fund size in the near future. But in general, I think lots of conversation is still at relative earlier stage. But I hope this trend is going to continue, and in the near future, we can see more capital going to outside United States market.
Daniel, I know you've been very bullish and looking at hundreds of opportunities. Tell me, do you share the same enthusiasm that MedTech investing will continue to grow over the next few years? I'm sorry, I think you just muted.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
Yeah, I think the trend continues to be still strong with the entire MedTech or medical device industry growing at about 6 to 8% per annum. But don't forget, most of that is dominated by legacy devices. So if you kind of carve that out, the new product growth is expected to be much, much higher. So there's still a lot of opportunity and exciting growth in that area. The one thing that we have found with COVID is that, as you mentioned, it has resulted in a new class of investors who have a greater awareness about the importance and value in healthcare investing. The other impact of COVID, of course, is also with hospitals in crisis and overflowing with patients. A lot of clinical studies have been affected. So what this means for venture investing is that in this last 2 years, while a lot of clinical studies have kind of slowed, the product development has continued apace, because those don't require interactions with the hospitals. And so there's now a backlog of companies that have finished product development. They're ready to raise funding for clinical studies and FDA approval. And so we expect 2022 to be another bumper year for MedTech investing.
Ashley, you represent a strategic that's one of the most proliferative investors into MedTech. J&J historically through JJDC has one of the earliest funds ever to invest in early stage companies before any of the other strategics started an internal venture fund. Tell us about a little bit more of the investment thesis and where you see the capital being deployed through JJDC and across all of J&J.
Sure. So I think for me, it's probably a little bit harder, Dave, to pinpoint kind of one exact therapeutic area. But I think if you kind of look across our businesses, being Diffuse Synthes, CSS with all of the businesses there, including Mentor and Clarence, Cerenovus, for example, and then Ethicon, you can start to kind of think about where those businesses are heading based on looking at some of the current investments and partnerships that we're making. So I think kind of that's one thing to think about when you're working with a strategic is do you present a solution to a need that company has with regards to its portfolio? You may have the best, newest idea, but it may not fit with a particular company. And so it's really important to understand with regards to strategics how you fit. I would also say, just kind of thinking about, Dave, your question around investing globally. You look at a number of the funds a number of the firms that closed new funds last year, and those are global funds. But I think one thing that's very important to keep in mind as an early stage company in Asia Pacific is you are now competing also globally. So making sure you know who your competitors are in the US and Europe, and how do you compare, and why is your technology or your value proposition stronger? So I think that's something really important to keep in mind as you're talking with investors or strategics that are global, as you're being compared globally too.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I had a fund that was about 2/3 Europe, 1/3 US investment. They placed almost $500 million in capital last year, and they said they were going to do a third, a third, a third, 1/3 Europe, 1/3 US, and 1/3 Asia Pac. So I've seen some shift in the investment thesis. Let's go to Daniel and Lou, please, for just a moment. We have, and I'm so encouraged to see over 100 people that are here on this webinar. These are companies that are founded throughout Asia Pacific. Tell me about considerations for investing in companies in Asia Pacific, what you see US investors holding for criteria, and how they would possibly deploy capital into Asia Pacific.
I can start. So Honeywell, we've reviewed and performed due diligence on and considered investments and invested in the US, Canada, Europe, Israel, and in Asia. We've got nothing in Singapore yet. We came very close to it about a year and a half ago, but that didn't materialize. But one thing we've noticed about Asian startups is that occasionally, or maybe sometimes more occasional than occasionally, a lot try to position themselves to be devices that are specifically intended for the national or the Asian market. And I think that's a huge mistake. VC investors are going to be looking for the next unicorn, the next big thing. They're going to be looking for companies with the greatest potential, which generally means a global market. Now, you can develop the market, you can develop the product in Asia, but make sure that you're able to demonstrate universal appeal and a pathway to a global business. Nobody wants to invest in a niche product in a niche market. So that's one of the takeaways that we have in terms of looking at Asia and investing in Asia.
Yeah, I could not agree more with what Daniel mentioned about having this global perspective. As I mentioned, for the founder we invest in United States, we kind of talk with them about having global perspective because they want to build a billion-dollar company, could be a global leader. So they want their solution to be the best, not only just in United States, but across the whole world. Same thing for the founder in Asia in general. As Daniel mentioned, the competition is global, and also for especially for healthcare. So it's very important for founder not only just look at, okay, which type of solution I could build quickly to deploy, but also build relative high technical barrier or competitive advantage for the potential future global expansion. I think another thing is really talking about how to specifically address the market size. Because when we talk about Asia, there's a pan Asia, there's like a mainland China area. This is a huge market. There's also Southeast Asia. So I heard founder talk about, okay, Southeast Asia is a huge market, but on the other side, it consists of so many different small countries. So it also really require founder to have a very specific go-to-market strategy, and which specific country will be the best one to the initial penetration, and which one will be the better one for the further expansion, and also how to leverage this multinational market to make it, instead of a potential challenge, but advantages. For example, consider the clinical trial, the diversity of the data set. So I think that's another thing I typically suggest to the founder base in Asia.
I've seen companies like Microport start Mindray. They start in Asia Pacific and then they go global. We see a lot of, on the flip side, many companies build for local markets, and that's as far as they want to go. I'd say some of the companies I see out of Korea, they are building for global markets in Europe and US right off the bat. Are you saying that you would want to see companies that are building right initially for global markets, or is it okay if they start local and then expand commercially into markets, as long as they're building appropriate technologies for Europe and US markets because of the size of those markets as well?
I think it's okay, Dave, for these startups to initially kind of even test the market and prove the market locally. But I think what's important is that they need to be able to demonstrate an awareness and understanding of the global market, a pathway to globalization. So now that you've proven this in Thailand, or proven this in Malaysia, or in Singapore, or India, how are you going to take this globally? Is there appeal for the product globally, or is this something that's very local, very Asian? So that's one thing. The other advantage that Asian startups have frequently, depending on where in Asia, is that the capital efficiency tends to be much higher. How much you're spending in order to develop a product is considerably lower in Asia compared to the US. From personal experience, my background, like Zhang Lu, is from a medical device company, and for $20-30 million, we develop a range of products, up to 9 product lines. Whereas in the US, we could see the same amount of money put into developing a single product. And I think, in the early stages of a company, that is so important because that's going to affect your valuation, that's going to affect the founder's dilution. And so I would say to Asian companies, take advantage of that, milk that to the fullest, and position that as a winning strategy as well. Do it quick, do it cheap.
Yeah, actually, that must resonate quite well with you, and that J&J and many other MedTech strategics have established research and development centers throughout Asia-Pac. When it comes to investing, I know that J&J, I mean, you yourself are there in Asia-Pac to deploy capital throughout Asia-Pac. Is that for local markets, or is that to bring those technologies to global markets as well?
Dave, I think it's really a mix, and just to tack on to what Daniel just shared, excuse me, I think more often than not, the preference is to see a product tested in its local market and that risk reduced in the local market before going bigger and really spending, to Daniel's point, that additional capital that it would take to have a device approved and get onto the market in the EU or in the US. I would say really though, in terms of what we're looking at, it is a mix. And there are, of course, cultural and anatomical differences that may make a difference in terms of looking at a product for a specific market versus looking at something global. I think those cases are probably fewer, but it is an important aspect to keep in mind. I look to just something that you had shared just now in terms of deploying capital. I know today's kind of focused on the equity aspect, but I would also encourage all those listening in today and watching that partnering, for example, with a strategic, it may not always be an equity investment, and that may actually be better for you. So if you're an early stage company looking to co-develop a product with someone or a type of pilot, there can be capital tied to that that may not necessarily be investment equity. So there's so many different ways to structure partnerships and relationships. And I would just also encourage kind of everyone to keep that in mind too as you're thinking about your commercialization strategy locally as well as globally.
Great. So it seems like there's a nice appetite and there's intent to invest across Asia Pacific, and we see so many leading technologies being developed there through many different programs that I participate in. Let's talk about some of the barriers, though. Lou, do you see issues, whether it's having access to management that makes it a little more difficult, attending board meetings, or seeing a path to commercialization in Western markets? What are some of the barriers that you see, and how do the founders resolve some of those barriers?
I think probably even before talking about the practical barriers, like for us, consider Asia Pacific market, the first thing is really, for example, when we look at a company, we're comparing them with other company we see in the market. So if it's the fundamental healthcare innovation, we're also, if I look at a company from Southeast Asia, I'm comparing with what I saw in United States as well. So fundamental tech advantages has to be very clear. That's the first thing. And what I found is, maybe I'm wrong because I don't have the latest information, but from what I saw and heard in 2019, 2020, I think lots of the innovation in healthcare in Asia Pacific is still more focused on healthcare service instead of healthcare tech. I think that's the part a little bit tricky for us to consider invest, because healthcare service is harder to pursue globalization compared with healthcare tech. That's probably is actually easy to consider for global expansion. Another thing is the type of healthcare innovation. It's probably because our focus is focused on the real healthcare innovation, but there's lots of other innovation we also saw in the United States, a direct to consumer, like a mental well-being app, direct to consumer app. There are tons of this type of well-being app, or even like a telemedicine type of innovation. So we also saw a lot of this type of innovation happen in Asia because Asia has huge population. So for founders, it seems like it's an easy route compared with doing the fundamental tech innovation. So I think this two has been the two main probably challenge for me to consider put money there. Beyond that, yes, there's a thing like you mentioned about how to better access to the management team, board meeting. That's a practical issue. But before that, I think these are the two major concerns I have.
Yeah, I've seen with the proliferation of remote patient monitoring. I'll be pretty candid. Some me too, but I can't say that's just throughout Asia Pac. I see that globally. Really hard to differentiate some of your cardiac monitoring A versus B. But because of the dissemination of population across broad geographies, I see that even more exacerbated and more necessary sometimes throughout Asia Pacific. But when I look at other technologies being developed, whether it's different forms of dialysis or new forms of dialysis being provided, I see it as leading in Asia Pac is just about anywhere. Daniel, do you see technology being developed that's on par or even beyond what you see being developed in the U.S.?
I think certainly, there is, there are good companies in Asia Pac as much as in anywhere else in the world. The trick is being able to find them, and the trick is being able to get them to the global markets. In terms of technology, every country or every jurisdiction has its kind of niche expertise. But one thing that countries like or jurisdictions like China and regions like Taiwan have an advantage in is in the area of AI. Now, there are a lot of AI companies. There's a lot of health AI companies in the US and everywhere else in the world. Everybody is purporting to use AI as a method to study images and provide diagnosis. But the one thing about AI is that it's all dependent on your data set and how large your data set is. Now, in the world, there is no larger data set than in China and in Taiwan. Because in Taiwan, you have a national health system, and I can't remember what the population is in Taiwan, but every single person's health data is captured in one entity. Same with China, with a stroke of the pen, you could have access to 100, 200, 300 million sets of data of individuals. That's never possible in the US with HIPAA and all of these other restrictions. So in terms of access to data sets and unique data sets, these two geographies have a unique advantage.
Good. Well, let's switch gears for just a bit. That's encouraging to hear that you're seeing exciting technologies throughout the region. How do they access U.S. investors? So I get asked this every day, even in the U.S. from companies that don't even know how to reach out and access U.S. institutional investors. Tell us about the way that it's best to reach funds such as yours, Lou and Daniel. And actually, I mean, you have multiple offices throughout Asia Pac. The best format to get there, is it through friendly introductions? Is it find the people that are investing, do your research and find out what their themes are and do a blind reach out? How do they get to these funds?
Yeah, and Dave, I think I'll actually take a step back for a minute because I think the last question impacts this. I don't think it's an issue of technology in the region. I see amazing new technologies every day. And really in the digital space, Daniel was talking about AI specifically, but that is something that we're looking hard at is what improves the patient journey from start to finish. That is digital. And I think though here, what makes it more challenging and one of those barriers to entry is talent. And I don't mean the talent in terms of who's coming up with the ideas and who can do the job, but I think back to example in the Bay Area, the band of CEOs. So these are the MedTech CEOs that get together, they share their war stories, they support one another, help one another, make introductions. You don't have that same ecosystem here quite yet. You do, I think, in specific markets, and it's coming, but it makes it more difficult. And I remember when I first came to Singapore, someone sharing with me their success story of a successful acquisition, and as it was that they went back to corporate in Minnesota to have a conversation with someone because they weren't getting any traction here in Asia Pacific. And that wasn't the only example that I heard. And so I think in terms of those introductions and finding your way, find someone that can help make those introductions, whether it's someone in the company, someone that you know, either someone you've worked with before. Again, the importance of that network comes into play. It's always easier if you know someone that can make the connection and versus a blind email, because then you're emailing, once a week if you haven't heard back, and it may just be because you didn't have that personal connection. So use whatever method you can, whether it's LinkedIn, or if you know someone that may be able to connect via WhatsApp. So I would just also encourage not to give up. And two, I look within J&J, for example, there may be, one platform that isn't as excited about your technology, but another that is. It's part of my job, for example, to make sure that potential technologies and small companies have that opportunity to get in front of all of the right people that could have an interest, whether it's JJDC from an equity investment perspective, or one of our business leaders, whether they're in the US or here in Asia Pacific. So, I think that was a very long-winded answer, Dave, but again, just the importance of leveraging the network, try to find somebody that has a connection, and then really foster and nurture that relationship so you can get in front of as many potential interested parties as possible.
Dave,
Appreciated.
I'm smiling because you asked the question, and my short and cheeky answer to that is that don't worry, if you're worth investing, a good US investor will find you, and a hardworking one will find you, because there are always ways of discovering that kind of technology and that kind of talent. But the more serious answer is that in addition to what Ashley has mentioned, do participate in the kind of regional and international forums. MedTech Innovator, for instance, is an excellent platform for you to showcase your technology. Half of the reviewers in MedTech Innovators are not based in Asia; they're based in the US and even in Europe as well. And so that's one way to get your company across. And there are others like APAC Med and other forums that you should certainly be involved in. Even if participating in local competitions gives you some visibility, and again, a hardworking US VC will be able to find you.
Yes, just to add on what Ashley and Daniel mentioned, warm intro is always the best. And another thing I want to highlight is don't always, not only investor intro will be valuable for VC to consider referral. Actually, founder referral is also very useful. Like for us, we like to take referral from founders we talk to or work with. Another good thing about lots of founders in the United States, I would say lots of them are minority immigrant. If you look at the background of the unicorn company now, almost 50% of them are minority immigrant, and there's a sizable portion of it actually from Asia Pacific. So try to leverage the founder community to get a referral to the investor, and also do some research, just to study the VC's portfolio to see whether they have existing investment in Asia Pacific already, then be able to target the right one to reach out to.
That's a great point. It's just be active in the ecosystem. There's, I'd say, while MedTech is a very large market, it's a very small community that I'd say there's probably only 1 degree of separation from you to that person you're trying to reach out and leverage your relationships or the relationships that somebody can make an introduction to all day long. Daniel and Lou and I just came from an investor conference 2 weeks ago, and so many people asked me, Dave, I can't get a response from this person. In 2 minutes after making an email, they said, yeah, I'll sit down with you at the conference. And it's nothing special about somebody. They just have confidence and they know somebody that screens something, and they bring a relationship and a trusted relationship. So other founders, and Daniel, great point about the ecosystem of APAC Med here. This is leverage all the relationships and utilize those relationships that can get you those introductions. It's much easier. Lou, you mentioned this to me a few weeks ago. It's so much easier to come through warm than through a blind or a very cold introduction. It doesn't get you the investment, it gets you to the top of the pile for consideration.
Exactly.
Well, Dave, if you remember, I think you probably give us like 3 or 4 referrals, and anything that comes from Dave offer, we would at least give it a serious look at it, right? No questions asked.
Oh, we got this recorded, so I'm going to hold you to that now, Daniel.
So that's that always helps a lot, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
I touch on that too, because I know government funding and non-dilutive funding is also a very important topic, and not one that we're as focused on today. And it certainly serves a very important purpose. But just to this point that Daniel and Dave are joking about right now, you also need to look at getting private sources of capital, whether it's dilutive or not, in part because of this network and the introductions that it provides. And I've seen a number of companies work to try to stay as non-dilutive, as long as they can, and they take longer to get to market and then potentially miss a window. So I think it's important to keep that balance in mind as well.
So let's go to the next step. Once they get introduced, what do you like to see in an investor deck? I have so many people that send me their deck, and I said this will go nowhere. And I'll take a lot of effort and put sticky notes or comments into it. You're missing 2 or 5 elements that I know the investor is going to say, I can't even open a conversation with this. It's not of interest, because not that technology is not good. They've got a really nice technology, an interesting team, but there's too many elements that are missing for me to even evaluate what I have interest in this. What do you really need to see in that introductory deck, Daniel, to say, I want to have a management discussion?
Well, I would even start with the deck. I would focus on the one-liner. We probably take a look at about 500 startups come across our desk every year, 500 to 600. If your one-liner or your headline on your email is telling me that you are in an area that we're not even interested in investing in, we're not even going to open the deck, right? So having the one-liner that clearly tells you what clinical issue your device is intended to address will help investors quickly screen the progress. And even if it's a rejection, at least you end that uncertainty very quickly, and you move on. An example of a bad one-liner would be, and this is a real example that we picked up from one of the decks, that ABC Medical believes that patients need to have access to the most innovative technologies so that they can receive the best care. I mean, it tells me nothing about the company, right, or the technology that they're involved in. And for most VCs, they're not going to waste time looking further. You need to be very clear in your one-liner. Now, beyond the one-liner, then we're going to look, among other things, start with the evidence of a clinical needs analysis. We like, at least for Honeywell, we like to see that the founder has invested effort to understand that there is a need and is able to articulate that need. I can't tell you how often we've met a lot of engineers in particular who have come up with an innovative gadget and are trying to market the gadget, but without understanding where that need is and whether is there such a need. So having a clear evidence of a clinical needs analysis is important, as is a clear value proposition. And by that, articulation of what clinical problems you're trying to resolve, what is the mechanism for action, not a whole lot of detail, don't give me a scientific paper, just a 2-3 lines, how does it work, and who is it intended for? And more often than not, 60% of the screening is done based on those few opening sentences.
Yes, to add on what Daniel mentioned, other things like we look at, the first thing is for sure the market, especially within healthcare, because I have a medical device background. So just sharing different perspective from the investor, whenever my investor had that, for example, for $100 million fund, we're looking for $150 million fund. We're looking for a company could potentially return like majority part of the fund when they have the exit. Which means the exit value should be roughly at least the 300 million, $500 million higher. So for some certain type of a medical device or other healthcare innovation might be a really good quick merge acquisition target, but not necessarily gonna create a sizable return to the fund for certain fund size. That's a very basic metrics as a fund manager we need to consider when we run our fund financial. So sometimes for founder, before talking with investor, also think that through. And then when you're talking with VC, the first initial couple critical message have to include the market size. Then could help us better evaluate whether this market size potential exit opportunity could be a good fit for my investment to return partial of my fund. Another thing is really the roadmap in terms of how long does it take for commercialization, clinical trial, and also raising next round. When you're raising seed round, Series A round, also think about after this round, how long would it take for you to reach the milestone in order to raise next round? Because we're doing a business kind of really related to the time. A sizable exit within 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years actually generate very different return for VC. So all this information I share, just want to really tell founder, also think from investor perspective. Like VC are looking for good financial returns. So from their perspective, how to align the interest and be able to share the number and share the information better to align investors' interest, and they could potentially take this risk with you at the earlier stage. Other things are very important, definitely team information. Another thing is competitive analysis. Sometimes I met founder, they try to portray the competitive landscape that, okay, we're the only one, we don't have much competitor. First, the majority of the time, it's not true. There are no such market. Our technology is so unique, you could not find any competitor. Another thing is, for us, we're not necessarily only looking at, okay, how you compare your metrics with other competitors. We also want to see how much the founder really know about this market. Does founder did a comprehensive analysis, knowing who are the major players and also what they're planning according to the potential competitive situation. That's the part we really cares. So for founder, we definitely are not looking for a perfect company or perfect founder at earlier stage, but we want to see a founder really think through everything and understand everything, and also already do a fundamental research about the market and all the players before they decide to launch their company.
Ashley, I sat for 25 years on your side as a strategic, whether it was a $5 or $30 billion company, and I used to laugh when I was on the on panels such as this, saying I'm betting on the pony while the investors are typically betting on the jockey. In other words, I'm looking for the technology. I'm probably going to unwind most of the team at acquisition, where the institutional investors were investing in the team that's going to get it across the goal line. Tell me about your attitude toward investing. Is it purely technology, or are you looking at the particular markets? Of course, they have to be within your strategic market, but how much of it is technology versus the team?
Well, I think it depends what stage, right, Dave? I mean, can you all hear me okay?
Just got a little bit like a can, but it's okay.
Okay. Is that any better?
Okay.
Okay, sorry. I think it depends, because if you're making an investment in an earlier stage company, part of that investment is dependent on the team and where they're going to carry that forward. If it's a later stage company, I think it's also dependent. Is it a new area for a strategic? If it is, the company may not have the expertise to carry it forward and distribute or sell it correctly. So I think it all depends on all of those moving parts, really. There isn't one kind of clear-cut answer.
Okay. Let's while we have the discussion with the strategic, maybe we'll mix it up a little bit. Either there's going to be a big hug or a little bit of a pushback between everybody here. Daniel, the attitude toward bringing in strategic investors. I know some institutionals that say, you know, I want a fair playing field for the exit, and I think strategic investors kind of muddy the waters for the exit to keep it an open field. And other times they love to invest with strategics because they help validate the intent for an exit and validate that that technology is warranted from a commercial player standpoint. Any thing that you'd share with our audience here about how you'd view them taking in a strategic investor?
Yeah, exactly as you said. I mean, we love the strategics because they're an early validation of the technology, or at least of the potential interest in the technology. We understand the fact that just because a strategic has invested doesn't necessarily mean they will acquire it. But you know, the fact that they've invested is good validation as well. The one thing that we are always sort of wary about strategics is that, you know, as long as that investment doesn't come with too many handcuffs and too many sort of that locks a company into a you know, that restricts the flexibility of the company to either raise future financing or for it to be sold to another strategic. The handcuffs are so strong as to, like, you know, for instance, if you've got an exclusive, if the strategic gets an exclusive distributor agreement along with an investment, that makes it very difficult for a second strategic to want to invest in or acquire the company. So we just got to be very careful with that. Also, we want to be careful with you know, class voting rights and veto rights. Some strategics in their short-sightedness, I guess, you know, ask for that, and to us that's a deal killer, because it means it's very difficult for this company to attract further investments.
Anything else to add from a perspective on that, Lou?
Yeah, sure. So we're the same. We're always love to work with strategic investor. Actually, we have a couple company that also got investment from G&G in United States. I think besides the advantages of leveraging the strategic distribution channel and market validation, another thing I saw from one of our cancer diagnostic company is before they got FDA approval, they have this really good technology, not commercialization ready yet, but they could take this service contract from G&G, be able to get some early traction revenue and also validation. That's also a really good support they could provide it to the founder. It's not only just after the commercialization, even before the commercialization. In terms of concern, I agree with Daniel. I would always advise founder, you know, don't take exclusivity terms from strategic investor. I think I did not see that much from the device company, no matter G&G, GE Healthcare, or Medtronic, but there's a strong push from a pharmaceutical company, especially when they're working with this like AI for drug discovery, this type of company, they always want to have exclusivity, which is really hard for another one to put investment. Now, even for VC to consider the next round, like, because what is the potential exit value might be limited, might be capped. Another thing we always remind founder is really be careful when bring strategic to the boardroom, because sometimes maybe the person they're interacting with is super founder friendly, but not necessarily means this person gonna stay long. So it's better to study their track record, like their past experience working with other founder. What is the general mandate for this corporate venture serve on the board? Because once you bring someone on the board, it's very hard to get them off it. And so it's also very critical for founder to consider that.
Ashley, in the J&J experience, do you typically take an active board or purely observational roles? Just got muted. Not yet. I think you're back on, Ashley. Nope. Something happened with the mic. Feel free to chime in or try again throughout the thing. So I think we only have about 5 minutes left. Let me just make an announcement again to anyone in the audience probably tired of hearing me ask all the questions and talk. So please, I invite, just click on the questions triangle. It'll give you a little drop-down menu, and you can put in any questions you'd like, and I'll pose them to the audience. I don't think you have microphones for the attendees here, but please go ahead and ask any questions that you'd like. In that, I guess, last question I'd have, Lou, any do's and don'ts for the companies when they're starting off their venture? And in other words, don't come to me 3 months before. Tell us about the typical process for you. I have investors that come to me and say, yeah, I'd like to place this by next quarter. I said, well, you're pretty late. I typically see anywhere from 3 to 9 months to close your entire round. And that's not to say somebody takes 9 months in diligence, but by the time you build your marketing effort, you start reaching out to your first tier. I don't know anybody at their first tier of investors that always has their full syndicate pulled together. And it could take upwards of 9 months to do a full capital raise till you close that round. Same experience and guidance, you would say?
Yes, 100%. We typically tell founder that make sure you at least have 6 months of runway when you start fundraising. 9 months will be even better because exactly as you mentioned, I think sometimes founder got misled because they raised a seed round, like $1 or $2 million very quickly. They thought, okay, I'm gonna do that again, Series A, B stage. But finding lead investor would take at least a couple months to finalize the term and then put together the co-investment and also negotiate the terms. And sometimes founder feels like, okay, I have a great traction and a great multiple. Does it mean I'm going to close the round very quickly? No, same process. Still finding lead investor, close up the legal due diligence, which may take another 1 or 2 months. So minimum, give yourself at least 6 months buffer for raising capital. Another thing is also related to which type of investor to choose at earlier stage. Consider when you're raising a round and may take longer than you expected. So one of the best practice is quickly talk to existing investor, putting a small bridge round to buy a couple more months, then to have a more flexibility to negotiate a term with a new investor. Instead of, okay, really running the clock, I'm gonna run out of capital, okay, could you give me the term sheet very quickly? That's when you got the new investor going to take advantage of that. Then you need to think back, okay, for the earlier stage investor, maybe I should find the one not only going to put in one check, but also capable to do pro rata in the next round, going to have reserve for me when we really need their small, like quick support before raising a big round they could put in capital.
Great. Daniel, do you like to see things even before they're starting to look for investors, just to get an early look at them, or just come to me when you're in the middle of a raise? At least for me, when I was strategic, again, I want to see something probably a year before they're going to be out to capital raise, just so I can socialize it internally, recreate a thesis. Looking at 500 companies, you can't be taking too early a look at everything. You want somebody to be pretty active, but tell me about your attitude about reach out to me when you're ... when.
Yeah, I would say you're right. Firstly, Zhang Lu's sort of your and Zhang Lu's 6 to 9 months sort of time frame is absolutely right. And I would, if I were a founder, I would start to socialize my company, full year ahead or more. As Ashley mentioned earlier, it's never too early to start looking at to start socializing and networking your company. You may not have all of the details there yet, but the critical details need to be there. And from an investor's perspective, we also actively seek out companies even before they are investable. In particular, we work sometimes with university projects, and they're not even companies yet, for two reasons. One, when we're investing in a particular area of technology, we not only look ahead, but we look behind and see what new technologies are being developed that could make our investment obsolete, potentially. And so we have an interest in looking behind and see what is coming, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years down the pike that is still in university research, but could potentially be deployable. The other reason why we wanted to get to know these companies early is, the data room can tell you only that much, but developing a relationship with the founders and understanding their management style, understanding the way they deal with crisis, and understanding their track record for delivery, those are important considerations in an investment. And if you wait until you're looking at the data room, you have a limited data set, right? Every founder is going to tell you that, well, he has met his previous targets and delivered on those. But when you have developed a relationship 2 years, 3 years before that, there's no way he can hide that, because he would have told you what he was trying to achieve, and whether he has met or not delivered on those promises. Those are important considerations for us as well.
Great. In the last minute or so, I want to just go into one of the questions or issues that I get hit with all the time from the startups that have issues with what do they do about this valuation. And we could make a half-hour discussion about this. And I always tell them, look, your investor's going to set the valuation. You need to have a starting point and a thesis. But if you're going to get hung up on the difference between 25 and 28 million dollars, you're doing the wrong thing. I don't even want to comment further. Tell us about how you go about valuation and what you want to hear from the company that you're looking to invest in. Keep it quiet, folks, or we want to know exactly what you're expecting for valuation. How do you deal with that, Lou?
Yeah, so for us, I agree with you. Sometimes it's not the absolute number. It's really about how much money founder need for reaching next milestone and how much dilution they want. That's the typical questions I would ask founder. And typically we suggest you don't want to have more than 20% of dilution for each round. And meanwhile, should not try to raise a huge amount of capital, be able to support you not talking to investor for another 2 years. I also told founder, not talking to investor for 2 years, not necessarily is a good thing, because keep talking to investor because you need to raise money is a really nice feedback for founder to understand, okay, probably there's something wrong. I need to pivot a little bit. Earlier stage companies are about, fine tuning again, and things might be very different 1 year from now compared with three months from now. So getting this feedback loop, leveraging the fundraising cycle, although I know most of founders don't like fundraising, that's a very important thing. And specific regarding the valuation, definitely there's the average number we saw in the market, like with no commercial traction, probably better not to be too high. With commercial traction, with the revenue number, what is the typical number we saw in the market? That's the market value as a reference for founder to consider. On the other side, I know last year and this year, there's huge amount of capital rushing to the healthcare industry, especially some of the investors willing to give super high valuation at earlier stage. Trust me, there's always consequences of having such a high valuation without commercial traction. And for us, we actually gave up a couple deals last year because a $1 billion firm jumped into my earlier stage deal, double, triple valuation, double, triple round size. But the challenge is when the company are raising Series A round, when required certain metrics to justify the valuation, typically does not have it. And then the consequences is having down round, which potentially could kill the company.
Dave, I just want to build on a little bit on what Zhang Lu had mentioned about continuing the dialogue with companies or with your investors. just because a VC has decided to take a pass on your investment, don't get disillusioned, or don't put them in your black book and forever never speak to them again, unless they're explicitly telling you that this is not an area that they invested. For instance, we're very clear, we don't invest in wearables, so then don't keep trying your luck. But other than that, if they do take some interest but decide to take a pass, if they're not right for this seed round, they may be right for an A round. If they're not right for an A round, they may still be an investor in a B round. So keep the faith, continue the relationship, and do your job, and then network, the opportunity, and you'll be surprised sometimes. I mean, we have taken a second look at some of these companies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just want to quickly come in there. David, I mentioned last time in the panel we were together a couple weeks ago. I also suggest to founder use every time talk to VC as a free consulting session. That will totally change perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Ashley was mentioning here in our chat that it's about the relationship often, especially with strategics. You want to start to craft that relationship. It might not be ready for them at this particular time. And also at the corporate level, and certainly down at the business unit level, the thesis and strategies can change every year. And I'm not saying a 180, or maybe you're not too sure what you're doing with your business, but there's a 10, 20, 30-degree shift every year in the strategy as you continue to grow, as the markets change, as the thesis changes. So I wouldn't preclude any strategic that you don't know what they're thinking about for their adjacencies or for their white spaces and their next steps. So engage them early. And then as Ashley noted as well, when you get down to the term sheet, you should have enough of a relationship and enough dialogue with the people that there should not be huge surprises. Of course, this is still going to be a negotiation, and you have to fine tune all of that. But if you're talking valuation here and you're coming in later there, then you haven't been having the right dialogue with the investor to begin with from the early stages. So get in there early, be active, and reach out to folks like our panelists here is what I'm hearing every day. So within that, I think we've come up to about an hour and 15 minutes. I'm gonna thank my panelists for your gracious time and all your insights, so valuable. We're so encouraged about what's happening in Asia-Pac, and I see your enthusiasm too. So thanks for sharing with the audience. I'm gonna turn back to Candy if she wants any closing remarks to the APAC Med audience, and I'll stop for finally from talking now. I knew it. I put Candy to sleep. So I'll ask if there's anyone else on the webinar, Olga or Frederick, if there's any parting comments. If not, I think we'll close the recording and say thank you. Okay, all. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you,
Bye
David.
now. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, Ash.